him a pair, me a pair, and I bought gloves. I spent a small fortune at that shop. Ready?
Did you wear your parka?
Oh, is it cold in here? It's always cold in here.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole for Gahanna City Council, Monday, October 11th, 2021. We are going to change the agenda excuse me, a little bit. We're going to have the presentation for the facilities assessment presentation, and there probably will be a lot of questions. We're not going to do a whole lot of questions. We're not going to do really questions tonight. They're going to have, I talked to the mayor today, and after this presentation, they're going to plan 4 one-hour workshops on the different parts of this so that we can have more understanding and ask questions at that time. So tonight will just be a presentation, as I understand it. So, and we would probably try to schedule those like at 6 o'clock on the night of our regular meetings and have a one-hour meeting workshop on the 4 different parts. So I guess I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Oh, thank you, Councilwoman. I very, very much appreciate that. Obviously, it has come up several times before. I know that most of you are aware that work on a facilities assessment has been underway for quite a while. Back in August, when Director Burry presented the capital needs assessment, she noted at the time that buildings themselves were not included within the capital needs assessment, largely because the needs around those facilities have extended beyond the capital needs long-term planning, and that we really need to take a deeper dive into the facilities and how we were going to approach those collectively as a group. Tonight is the time when we finally get to hear the results of the facilities assessment. It's been underway for quite a while. Was started under most recent version was started under prior administration. I picked it up last year, right before COVID hit. It then got paused by COVID. Pizzuti, a company, was the vendor who was working on the assessment at the time. They have been troopers working on this with us as we have started, stopped, given COVID and what was happening around that. But we have been working on this certainly since I've been here, a very short period of time after that. You will hear a lot of information tonight, and we realize that there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be thrown at you. And really the whole purpose of this evening is to provide a high-level overview of what the actual assessment said at the end of the day. As Councilwoman McGregor said, she and I spoke earlier today and talked about the fact that there's just so much detail that we have learned over the last 15 to 18 months as we have really continued to dig into all that has been done with regard to evaluating our facilities really over the last 15 years, as you will hear shortly. So to try to delve into that level of detail with you in one night does not do you a service, it doesn't do our residents a service, and we really want to make sure that you, council as a body, know everything that we do and that we've learned about facilities over the past, again, 15 to 18 months as we've gone through this. A lot has happened in the meantime. We've had issue 12, that's impacted our staffing, our programming, that's impacted facilities as well. Construction costs have escalated and continue to do so, and there's many fluid variables that continue to change. In the meantime, things and issues continue to evolve within our facilities that continue to impact how we are evaluating them and what our needs are. So I'm going to actually turn this over to Kevin Schultz, our IT manager. Kevin was the one who picked up the gauntlet of this when I threw this down to him when he came on board last year. It made sense that he as IT would be the one to kind of lead the charge on the facilities assessment. IT is something that obviously has significant needs in every facility that we have. He also is the only department that does not have I would say a fighting interest in who has priority over the most important facility here in the city. So he's able to take an objective view and leadership on this project, and he's done just a yeoman's job of really being a project manager on this. So Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just going to run through a few quick slides here and then turn it over to Jim Russell from Pizzuti to go over the last leg of the project here. But, so we're going to start in the Wayback Machine like the mayor had indicated, but we're going to go all the way back to 2006. And I think it's important to start there only because of the the report that we found, unearthed, I guess, if you would, that really identified, I think, some key pieces of information that I think are important for you guys to key in on, and then it kind of sets the stage, the stage from there. So back in 2006, the city had commissioned a report to evaluate the existing facilities, to evaluate the city properties, assess the staffing needs, because obviously staffing needs directly impact this number of square foot that any in each department would need. And then it took a look at the facilities as to whether or not they should be or could be renovated and expanded. And then it looked at an overall implementation plan. Okay, what's important here is what you see on the screen here is that each facility and the number of square foot, the square footage for each department was assessed. You know, taking the floor plan, identified what IT was using, for example. That was all quantified by building. And what you're seeing on the screen here is that result. So the orange, if you would, the orange line, the blue, let's start with the blue line. The blue line is the actual square footage that the police department is, that the service department is, the Parks and Recs maintenance garage is. The orange line is the line at which, or the square footage that facility should have been at the time in 2006. That took into consideration the existing staff, the existing staffing numbers at each one of those particular locations. And the report was factored out. And it basically said back in 2006 that our police department in this example should have been 230% larger than it was currently. So when you add up all of those numbers, the other key feature here is that the report identified that the city was 134,000 square feet short in order to operate it at its most efficient levels. So basically, we needed to add 126% of the square footage that the city currently operates. And I use the word currently on purpose because we've not added, as you guys know, we've not added any square footage since 2006. So if we move along, about 10 years later in 2017, the administration at the time had released an RFP to conduct a facilities assessment, and that was awarded in 2 different phases. I'm going to talk about the first phase, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim to talk about the second phase. But the first phase was an inventory and assessment of each one of the facilities. Okay, the report identified programming and needs. So how much space and what are the specific needs for each of the departments? What is the actual condition of each of the facilities? And then what's the functionality inside of that facility? Isn't it meeting the need of those individual departments? So the chart, and we're going to get into these in the workshops that we talked about in greater detail. We'll dive into these in a lot greater detail. But basically, OHM had inventoried 27 different criteria that they evaluated each of the facilities on. And what you're looking at in the chart there is anything in red was identified as fair and poor, and anything that's identified in green was listed as adequate inside of their report. So as you can see, something like City Hall in the middle of that chart there is about a 50-50 split, whereas the police department or the service department, Parks and Rec maintenance facility, all rate poorer or fair or poor versus adequate at this particular point in time. I think that's important to keep in mind for a couple of different purposes. But basically, you know, we have the square footage issue that was identified in 2006. We have some fair and poor conditions, some of which have been addressed through other projects. Boiler project maybe over at the senior center, for example. Boiler project over at PD this year. You know, but we're replacing skylights in this building. We're replacing roofing projects and doing a variety of other projects with the service department that, you know, are on the books at this particular point in time. So again, we'll get into the greater detail there when we get into the workshops. But I think it's important to note there that this report is also going to be 5 years old in January, and you know we've not necessarily improved the situation. We've not maybe made it even worse, but you know what is the actual condition of the facilities themselves. So this day here is primarily for Jim. and for Pizzuti to present the results, but basically Pizzuti was charged with two different things. Phase 2 and 3 of the project as it was outlined in the original RFP. But phase 2 was to come up with the strategy and concept planning around each one of these facilities. So how big should a modern-day police headquarters be? How big should a service garage be that we need to operate from? That was phase 2. And then phase 3 was to prioritize the facilities and then identify some funding strategies and those types of things, which I'll turn over to Jim for him to discuss the results of that plan.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for allowing us the opportunity to, I'll say, to continue to serve you. We've been doing work in Gahanna mainly as a private developer for many, many years, and so this is an opportunity for us to advance, I guess, little-known experience that we have. It's a separate company called Pizzuti Solutions that I head up for the Pizzuti family, but primarily our work is with the public sector. 95% of our clients are public sector clients. We help solve facility issues from here locally, numerous projects for Franklin County, City of Columbus, other suburban communities, and it allows us to take our experience as real estate developers and understanding how to advance projects privately with our experience in the public sector and how to help the public sector advance their projects in the most cost-effective way. I have lead a staff that includes architects and contractors, but also former public officials. Myself, I've served in the public sector for about 10 years. Spent many times in Gahanna when we started the Mid-Ohio Development Exchange. You're one of the founding members and continue to be, so I had many brown bag lunches in your conference room. Know your facility very well. So we're pleased to be here and to present this first round, really orally, to talk a little bit about what we found, what's ahead, what our key recommendations are, and then to dive in much deeper in the workshop environment to let you know how we kind of got to where we are. Just kind of a high level, the process that we follow is twofold. One is to sit down and do numerous interviews. Those are in-person interviews. Those are staff interviews that we've done to really conduct and understand current workload, current space requirements, and also projected space requirements, really understanding what staff and the administrators think their work will look like over the next 5, 10, 15 years to get an idea of what they're experiencing. We also look deeply at population trends and what's going on population-wise to see how fast you're growing, what you're growing, try to reach some, I'll call it a development hypothesis on really what's the intersection of need versus potential growth opportunities and how that kind of comes together. It's a little bit like when you ask your children, what do you want for Christmas, and you get a big shopping list. Part of our job is to analyze that shopping list and make it the what we're going to buy list and not just a wish list. So it's really a process that also involves understanding the civic experience, and that's really the intersection of your residents to how government is provided to make sure that things are done in an efficient manner, because that's really how government and services should be offered. So that's kind of the premise that we used as we were analyzing the space needs and requirements. Again, as Kevin had pointed out, we had some stops and starts. I think it allowed us to do two things. Frankly, we had an early round of interviews with prior staff and another round of interviews with current staff. And so it really gives us a good insight of what your folks think they need to move forward. Some of the key recommendations that we're going to talk about, and you will be getting a bound copy of the report later this week, so you'll have that in preparation for those workshops so you really understand some of the basis. And that will include some of the survey results, a breakdown of individual space needs, so you'll see all those hard numbers that we'll be able to talk through at a later date. But we have 4 key recommendations. 2 that we'll prioritize is really the development of a new operations center to replace existing operations center for service and parks and rec, as well as a new police facility that become key. The next 2 priorities are really going to be financially driven and moving forward as quickly as you can, and those recommendations will be for a new city hall facility, and we'll talk about what that means when we say new city hall facility, and the potential for a new community center, which is something that was not part of the original study, but that came out part of the community input that was received during the Issue 12 campaign, as well as the 2006 report. So I'll talk a little bit about that and how that can fit into your strategies. So we'll start first with the Operation Center, and what our job is to look at those existing needs and tell you, here's what you need, here's what it's going to cost, and then recommend site or location for further investigation. Currently, you know, the current center is located on Oklahoma Avenue. It's a shared facility between Service and Rec and Parks, and the Service Department also shares a facility with the Gahanna Jefferson Local School District as well. And so looking at all of those facilities and what's needed in the future, we've identified approximately a need for 58,000 square feet of facility, and also enough land to have outdoor storage for both fleet and materials and supplies that are needed by both of those departments. We recommend from a site that you look at existing sites near and adjacent to Taylor Road. It fits into the use areas. It's under land that's under control currently by the city as your best options, but other sites may be evaluated once you're into the due diligence of those sites, understanding the environmental conditions that you may find to make sure those are suitable for construction and development. Give you an idea of the range of cost for that facility. For the Operations Center, you're looking at a range of between $4.8 million and $6.6 million for design and construction only. That does not include any additional land costs that you may have to meet the space and land requirements that you'd be looking at. For that facility, we're looking at about 10 acres of land that would be required to meet both the indoor facility and the outside storage area. A lot of the challenges that you're facing at the Operations Center, the OHM study really outlined a lot of them. I mean, it's building condition is really the number one challenge that you have at those facilities, and making sure they have adequate storage and capacity, not only for current existing staff, but to have some space built into that facility, allow for training. You have a lot of seasonal help that comes in and out, and to have some available space to be able to do training and staging of those associates is important as well. So all that is included in the Operation Center. Police Department, I want to read a section of the OHM report because I think it summarizes it very well. Think back that when the police facility was built in 1971, I believe you had a commissioned staff of 14 officers and civilians to serve the community. That building was expanded in 1990, I think in the early 1990s, but you're currently up to well over 80 associates that we expect to be in that facility. So space is really cramped, underutilized, inefficient, challenging, that I think, I'm sure any of you have been in that building have seen, but I'm going to read just that excerpt of the OHM report for you because it says it all. Modifications made to accommodate the growing, changing department over the years have created compromised condition in many areas, and programmatically, many areas are at maximum capacity and below par for current police facilities. Locker rooms, equipment storage, fitness facilities, lack of separated space for command staff, and numerous other areas that really are all subpar. The Emergency Operations Center and the second floor conference room also lacks proper secure protection and hardening from threats or severe weather conditions. I think we have to say a whole lot more other than your department's growing, it's well recognized, it provides such an important public service that making sure that it is adequate to deliver public service is really important. And that building creates a lot of challenges. And so, looking at replacing the police department, a lot of communities are moving to what we're calling a justice center, which would include the potential location of the police department with mayor's court being co-located. So we give you a couple options. If both of those spaces, so a new justice center that would be police department and a mayor's court, we're looking at approximately an 89,000 square foot facility. If you would keep mayor's court in council chambers at another location, that would drop to about 83,000 square foot of space that would be required for the police department. That would require an identified site between 8 and 10 acres, really closer to the 10, depending on parking requirements that you would want to incorporate in if mayor's court and other services are adapted or included in that building. Give you an idea on a budget range, you're looking at a budget for that project of about $26 to $34 million to develop that facility. Again, facility only, not any additional land costs that may be required, and about a 36 to 39 month lead time to get you through final programming, design development, construction documents, and then into construction and move in. So that's kind of the time frame that you're looking at. In the sites that we reviewed that meet that, our recommendation is to co-locate, if possible, with Mifflin Township into the Columbus Metropolitan Library facility and work with the library on either building a facility adjacent to or as part of that development would be your most cost-effective and most centrally located facility for the police department. But again, that would have to have further assessment done to understand the potential to get everything to fit on that site. That's the police department. And then kind of the next tier of facilities that we looked at included, again, we had talked about City Hall being next priority and then the community center. With City Hall, you have a few challenges. Certainly the civic experience is a challenge here. This facility itself, built and designed, was like a lot of facilities around Central Ohio and city halls, which were nice to look at. Nice to be a part of the original design, but it really doesn't speak to how public service is really offered today. So you have a lot of challenges and inefficiencies in the building and adjacencies. When we talk about adjacencies, it's really about what departments can fit next to what department to try to improve the level of public service, both in terms of staff time, but also response time to the public and the ability to get through work. This facility also has challenges related to some accessibility and security that we note here as part of this development, and it really doesn't accommodate the projected growth that we'll see over that next 15 to 20 years. So we're looking for City Hall is a new building or a facility of about 38,000 square foot of space, a minimum requirement of about 3 acres to accommodate parking for the public need of parking that's located for a City Hall project. A budget for a newly constructed City Hall would cost in the range of $17.7 and $23.25 million. Again, construction only, design and construction only, that land cost if you would have to acquire other land site. We broke down City Hall as really 3 options that you have. Certainly renovate and redevelopment is reconstruction is always one of the options. I think part of the challenge that we see here is really a lot of the deferred maintenance. I mean, in essence, to bring this building back up to a level of service that is important, you're going to spend anywhere up to $1.5 to $2 million before you would start the changes that you would need to improve the efficiency of the building. So certainly understanding that and considering does it make sense for you to make that investment is something that would really warrant much further detailed discussion and understanding. Another thing to consider is this is a very important site. It is important, it's commercially viable, understanding that City Hall complex today does not generate taxes, nor would it wherever you would be located. But this is a highly trafficked area, very important. Something to consider is, should a City Hall or public facility be located on it? So one of the considerations you may want to make. And it's also adjacent to the high school, which we all know is expanding. Our recommendation, our top recommendation would be for you to work closely with the schools on either a land exchange that would allow you to allow the schools to take advantage of this site for the more efficient design and construction of the facility, and then to also allow the city to potentially locate in Clark Hall. It's a facility that at one time was designed for other public use more than for the schools. That building is approximately 72,000 square foot, would easily accommodate City Hall needs at a good location that's already, again, off the tax rolls, but also the potential for the schools to locate the administration portion of the building on an upper floor of that to combine services, again, that civic experience getting better for the residents of your community and not just the people who are working in it. So that would be our #1 recommendation because we think it's the most cost-effective solution for all parties. It certainly would require further discussion. We did meet with the superintendent and a few of his staff members early on in the process to broach that idea and to talk about that because it was going to be something that would fit into our report. At the time, they were willing, thought that was a great idea to partner. Certainly, continued discussions that the city would have to have with the school district, especially with them advancing their projects, is critical. But that would be the #1 recommendation. Our next 2 recommendations would either be to identify a new site for a new City Hall or to consider you have a few vacancies in the community, office vacancies that have occurred through COVID, the potential to compare that to either acquiring existing space and modifying that where the systems may be at a newer level than what you have experienced in this building and less required internal disruption to the building. So that would be an option that we would recommend as well, to evaluate not only the new construction on a new site, but also the potential on currently vacant sites in the Gahanna that you could consider either a lease purchase structure or an acquisition of. That's an approach that Franklin County took with the Board of Elections. For those of you who have been to the Board of Elections, located on Morris Road, they originally went into that facility as a lease. We helped them negotiate that to a lease purchase, which really saved them money over the long term instead of going through the full term of that, to modify that building for their needs and then purchase it at a discounted price prior to getting into the bulk of the lease term. So it was a long-term lease that they were able to shorten with a purchase contract. So there's a couple options there that you can consider moving forward. Give you an idea on budget, again, for that 38,000 square foot, you're looking at a design and construction budget of about $17.7 million, up to about a little over $23 million, and again, a design and construction schedule to do that between 36 and 39 months from concept to move in. So that's City Hall in a snapshot. And finally, the community center, which was not a good part of our original assessment, but during the course of the work that we were doing, we had a lot of comments, both back to referring to the 2006 plan, but also, again, comments that came out of the Issue 12 campaign of really wanting to have a city-owned facility that was available for recreation, community service, maybe expanded senior services. We are currently working with the city of Upper Arlington on their new facility, a little bit larger. What your report initially had said is a facility of approximately 53,000 square foot of space that would include a variety of opportunities. I don't believe that included an aquatic center. That is something that we heard loud and clear, the potential for an aquatic center necessary, both as some of the long-term plans for the school, but also used by the public. The Upper Arlington facility is going to be approximately 100,000 square feet of space, recreation space. They are also including 50,000 square foot of partner space, which would basically be developed as we'll call it as a neighborhood office that's actually incorporated into the community center. They've identified, and we've worked through 2 partners that haven't been formally announced yet. You would have heard of both of them that will incorporate part of the wellness and advancing some of those other programs within the community center itself. That's a process that New Albany also did. It was a partnership with Ohio State in the Heights Center. So a combination of public and a nonprofit working with them on the delivery of kind of well-being with recreation and community service. City of Hilliard is also currently looking at developing a new community center. Theirs is also about 100,000 square foot in the initial program that they've done. They are on the ballot right now for an issue to build that facility. So if you're looking at that, using the numbers in the program that was originally identified in 2006, you'd have a facility, again, of about 50,000 square foot, ranging in the cost of $28 million to $33 million. If you would go through the formal programming of a community center, that may include separate facilities, separate or connected incorporated senior facilities, and would be pushing that 100,000 square foot, much like Upper Arlington or the City of Hilliard's planned facility. You'd be talking about $55 to $60 million in cost for the community center. So that's kind of the 4 facilities that we looked at and identified. Of those 3, again, the priorities to us would be the operations center in the police department, City Hall third, and then the community center with more planning and when it would fit financially for you. I think if you all, it would be like everybody else, if you had unlimited funds, it'd be easy to move forward with some of these things, but that would be the last of the priority facilities that we identified. The other thing that we included is really a high level. I mean, there's many ways to deliver a building and to finance a building. Really, the 4 key choices that you have is certainly the use of general obligation funds. That's part of the passage of the issue, gives you that ability to fund some of those larger capital improvements. So the issuance of general obligation funds will certainly be the most common use and financing of capital projects that the public sector will look at, but there are a few others. Certainly, sale leaseback approach is an opportunity where you kind of reach out to the public sector, or the private sector, to build facilities and do a lease purchase back, where you're able to push the financial commitment, the financing commitment onto the private sector, and you just sign a long-term lease agreement with a capital, maybe a capital lease structure where you're purchasing at the end of the lease either for $1 or some predetermined price. So it's a way to kind of advance a project without taking the financial burden on. It will cost you, that's probably the higher price cost approach, because you're utilizing private financing instead of public financing. Another opportunity that you may want to consider is the use of certificates of participation. For those who aren't familiar with COPs, and not Chiefs COPs, but certificates of participation, it's a tool that allows you to go into the marketplace and, much like a bond, bring investors in. But a third party would then would build the facility and hold the title, and so the city would then be a tenant of the facility. So you get the same public financing approach and treatment, but it does not count against your debt service limit. So it does not restrict your ability to issue general obligation funds. It is a credit. It is on your credit, and it is a credit liability, but it's not really getting into your debt service capacity level. So it allows you to kind of finance it in a public sector. The rates are very similar to what you would get in a bond. It has the same tax protection to investors, but it just does not count against your debt service. So something to consider as well. The Las Vegas City Hall was built with certificates of participation here locally, while it was years ago. City of Grove City's City Hall was built with certificates of participation, and so was Pickerington's, the city of Pickerington. One of the unique approaches, and we would probably recommend, your most cost-effective way to utilize that may be to go through or work through your Community Improvement Corporation. Your CIC can actually issue the certificates of the participation, own the building, and lease it back to the city. So it'd be your, there's no profit direction in that, so the ability to kind of do it, hold your costs down as much as possible, but utilize that same tool would be something that would be available to you as well. And so we can go into more detail in the future, but that's another option that we looked at. And then the potential for revenue bonds. Revenue bonds, as you know, is really tied to a specific revenue source. Most typically, it's water and sewer, electric utilities that you would have that could take a portion of the increases. In the case of a community center, it could be BEBR fees that you could issue a revenue bond against, so it's not going to the general obligation of the city, but really focused on specific revenue. In some cases, facilities, court and justice facilities, so much like what we would do with the police and justice building, court fees and things that you would attach that are not taxes but rather fees could be dedicated as a revenue source to pay back a revenue bond. Again, to minimize your exposure across the land on what debt structure you would like to look at. So that's 4 of the financing options that we gave. There may be more creative ways. I always say the gray area of the law is the most colorful, but for this purposes, we wanted to keep it pretty standard for you. And that is part of our report, just a high level of these are tools, and we'd be happy to work forward with you on how those could be implemented. And then finally, we included some next steps. Certainly the most important, we believe, is to go through a series of the workshops with you and the administration, really to dive deep in here and how we came to the conclusions that we did, how the projections work, how efficient those spaces are, and just to allow you to kind of dive deep into it so you understand what we're talking about, what we're considering, and you feel comfortable about that. And also really to talk about the conditions and the priority. That becomes important. All the numbers that we shared really were at snapshots in time, right? So we're trying to predict as much as we can in the near term what these expenses are, but certainly there's a lot of construction escalation that comes into play that's impacted by time. So time is right now is your worst enemy, and it continues to be your worst enemy because nothing typically goes down in price anymore. And so you're dealing with big numbers. As an example, most of these projects, for every 30 days on a project that may be about $50 million, you're probably losing between $75,000 and $100,000 in construction escalation and interest cost. So on larger projects that go out over 30 months to 35 months, there's a lot of lost money that is just going to pay other people and not really towards your project. So timing becomes very important, so we identified the workshops as a key component of that. Certainly looking at how you would incorporate and agree to the prioritization of facilities should be important, so you don't continue to advance and either get into the trap of deferred maintenance being the MO, which a lot of communities have to, so it's not a knock, it's the process, but deferred maintenance does nothing but add to your cost, both operationally and in a capital sense when you're trying to rebuild, replace those facilities. So to move through and identify, so you have a plan to advance these projects because they will not get less expensive. And then following up with that is, detailed advancement of it, whether it be the partnerships with the schools, additional acquisition or site investigations that need to occur. So once you have your priority list set, we've made our recommendations, you make that final decision along with the administration, then it's a matter of what are those next steps that really need to taken to advance these projects in a timely manner. So that's all I have for you tonight. I know it's a lot of information. You will get it printed, you'll be able to read it, and then we'll be able to spend time with you as much as you would like to go through the analysis. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Jim. If I could, I also wanted to just ask Chief Spence to speak for a moment as to his history with the facilities, if that's all right with you.
Brian had one question.
Oh, absolutely.
One clarification question.
Sure.
You referenced the Oklahoma facility. In the discussion of that project or that effort, is that strictly the Oklahoma facility that is Parks and Service, or does that also include the Science Boulevard service facility and maintenance facility?
It would include Science Boulevard and again, identifying either another joint location if you want to keep with the bus or to incorporate it in.
Yeah,
So
that
the
would be
square
my
footage
follow-up
is the
question.
same, right. Yep.
So the 10 acres and project would include what is required for both Oklahoma in its entirety and Science in its entirety, including the
Yes,
school facility?
for the
Okay.
city only.
I'm sorry?
For the city only. If the schools become a part of that, it could creep up.
So acreage is not included for the school storage as well as any maintenance that they would currently have?
That the schools have, yes. Purely city.
Okay.
If I could, Councilman, we've had, based on the discussions that Mr. Russell had with the superintendent, we've had subsequent discussions with the school district as well around what I referred to as these overlapping Venn diagram type of situations. And we've had conversations around a joint operations complex that would both bring the bus facility in as well. And I think, and Kevin, I'll look to you for numbers, but I believe that bumped the estimated acreage up closer to 16.
Yeah, it actually increased quite a bit because of the bus.
Sure.
And what they thought, I don't want to say they need to double their bus storage, but it's considerable. It's a considerable increase in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
If I could ask, I'm sorry, Chief Spence, if you're okay.
Hi, good evening, council. Can everybody hear me? Am I on?
You're
Am I on? As one of the longest serving employees, at least in the room, I wanted to have the opportunity to speak before council, and I wanted to have this discussion for many years on this issue. And frankly, the time is now for action. Nothing in this work, and I assure you a great deal of work has gone into this process, a great deal of energy, time, and this dates back to 2005 on these studies. The data presented, our current situation, none of that is going to change. Only the cost and the impact on our ability to deliver services to those that we serve. We hear quite often in this room about the coming increase in population to Central Ohio. This body deals with growth every week, whether it's business, residential, manufacturing, roadways, infrastructure, and with that, traffic congestion and crime. Facility, and I talk about all city facilities, but specifically the police department lacks sufficient room for our existing staff, for our equipment, and for modern policing operations. We too have dealt with growth, and we have long outgrown all city facilities, but especially the police department. Focusing a little bit on Jim, what he said, our building and its existing footprint was built in 1971 and 14 employees. In 1991, 1992, a second floor was added that added essentially about 2,000 square feet of usable space to a building that was built in 1971. It had the best of intentions. I was one of the first employee that was hired and moved into that new building I was badge number 41. Our locker room had one additional locker in it. Since that time, we've cannibalized space in that building to facilitate a rapidly growing police department. As I said, in 1992, we had 33 employees. We're now approaching 80. I think we have 78 right now. In 2006, we repurposed building space in our basement because the building was contaminated with lead. We did a remediation project. Work was done on the basement. The range was closed, and we moved our property room to the basement. All of that, we still lack proper interview rooms, evidence processing, areas for the public to participate in the policing process. It's very hard for me to conduct our Citizen Police Academy in the city of New Albany. We need that space to engage with our residents, to participate in trainings, public events, meeting space. The building was built prior to ADA. Many of the areas in our building are inaccessible to the public. That's crime victims, that's people that we interact with. It was also built prior to any modern technology as we know it today, networking, infrastructure, computers, server rooms, all the things that we need to run a modern department. Finally, and a few other points, location is critical. It's very critical to our response times and public access to police services. Again, response time is really a separate and very detailed conversation, but our response time is important to everyone in this community and also to our regional partners. Energy. Our building is energy inefficient. There are hot zones, there are cold zones, there's snow sometimes inside our building, our windows leak. There are a lot of energy issues, and it's inefficient. There are health issues, as I mentioned, safety and security, and finally, all of that is independent of being inefficient and really lacking the proper space that we need. Again, I go back to the original discussion. The time is now. We need your help. We need these workshops to move forward. Nothing in this situation is going to change. It's only going to get worse. And I implore you, we need your help. We need to move this project forward. Thank you.
So that concludes our facilities assessment presentation for tonight. But as I said, there's as you can tell from Mr. Russell's presentation, there is a great deal of information to share with you. Details on every single one of the buildings, what they did, the interviews, the information gathering, and we look forward to the opportunity to have some more in-depth discussions with you. Ultimately, I think we've all realized we have a great deal of priority number ones in this city. We've had years of deferred maintenance, and I keep referring to it right now as juggling fireballs. And it's when you have a list of things that have become priority ones, it's hard to then decide what takes priority in the priority ones. So we do have a yeoman's job ahead of us, but I think this is part of our longer term planning, and this is one facet of what we've been working on, so that we can have that larger discussion in defining where we are headed in future years. So thank you very much for your attention for the presentation tonight. I appreciate it. And unless you have anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
again.
you very
Looking
much.
forward to working closely with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you for your time. Okay, we will move on to item B, items from the Department of Parks and Recreation. Oh, sorry.
Good evening. I have two items for you. The first item is a motion respectfully requesting to bid the Woodside Green parking lot replacement.
I saw that there was going to be, is it going to change the footprint much, or is it going to be, they said they were looking at that whole, how it's laid out and how it could be better laid out, and
Yes, the intent was to expand the amount of spaces that are available. So we'll go from 55 spaces with 2 ADA to 77 with 4 ADA spaces.
how is that, how will it, is it go farther into the field, or how does that?
The islands where there are the trees have thus been removed. They were diseased trees at that point, and some of them were already removed but had been left over. So there was some wasted space in the middle of the parking lot. We'll also be utilizing some space on the south end of the nature playground.
When, it just came up with an apartment building, but the islands, for so many spaces, they had to have islands, and we don't have to follow that?
We will have to, of course, follow any type of code that we have. Based off of the landscape around it, we'll, of course, have to have a landscape plan to accommodate the requirement for spaces, for the amount of spaces.
So we don't have to keep the islands?
No.
Okay, all right. Any other questions?
No, fine.
Everybody okay with this on consent agenda?
Yeah.
This will be a great improvement there.
It'll help relieve some of the congestion from the neighborhood.
Okay, the next ordinance 0065, 2021.
Yes, the Parks and Recreation received unplanned funds of a total of $1,950. This is for a memorial tree as well as recreation program. We are requesting a supplemental appropriation to transfer the unappropriated unreserved balance of the general fund into the Parks Materials and Supplies as well as the Recreation Contract Services.
Any questions? Okay with consent on this?
Yeah.
No, well,
Unplanned money is always good.
you what?
Unplanned money is always good.
So this will be on for first reading and then no need to come back consent agenda. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, items from the Department of Public Service and Engineering.
Good evening, everyone. The first item I have for you this evening is our yearly health services contract. As you all know, each year the city contracts with Franklin County Public Health to provide health services for the city and to act as the city's public health department. The services include such things as inspections of sanitary systems, food establishments, hotels, public swimming pools, spas. Additionally, they enforce housing and sanitation, and perform radon testing, among many other items. The cost for the 2022 program is $335,687.76. This represents roughly 2% increase from the 2021 contract. So we are respectfully requesting legislation for the mayor and the director of public service engineering to enter into contract with Franklin County Public Health for the 2022 health services contract.
Any questions?
Is the 36,018 population correct?
That is based off of most recent MORPC estimates.
Because I thought it was 35.
The contract is based off MORPC's estimates, so they have the most up-to-date since the census doesn't go up.
I know, but
You can't trust the people at Morpsey.
right. No, I thought I had seen that that it had not gone to your property.
We double-checked, because the mayor
Okay.
had the same concerns based on the census, and we
Because I thought it was
double-checked.
35 something.
It is. The census number came back
Yeah,
at
okay.
35,726. And when it was 36,8, whatever, then 36,000 something in here, I asked Grant the same exact question, and he said FCPH bases it on MORPC's number, so I expect you to correct that with William.
That'll come tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so do we need this to come back or just go forward? Okay, so we will have this on for first reading and then no need to come back to committee and then on consent agenda. Next item, 0059, 2021.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to levy the assessment for sanitary sewer fees at 3737 Heinz Road. As you all may remember, property at 3737 Heinz has a failing septic system and has been ordered to tie into public sewer by the Franklin County Board of Health. In order to accomplish this, there is 3 pieces of legislation that have occurred over this past year, and this is the final piece of legislation that actually levies the assessment. So after this final piece has passed, the council office will publish the resulting ordinance for a week. Notification letter will be sent to the property owner, and then the assessment will be filed with the county. So we are respectfully requesting that council adopt this ordinance authorizing the city to levy the assessment for 3737 Heinz Road. Based on recent discussion with the county, they have mentioned that they need to have any assessments by the 18th of this month if it is to be placed on the 2022 taxes. We have brought this forward as a regular ordinance. We have not brought forward as emergency and waiver. However, if council would like to pass as emergency and waiver, that would get it on for 2022. Otherwise, it would be posted in 2023.
Nancy, if I could.
Sure.
I guess I would be uncomfortable with passing this as emergency and waiver because it's essentially a taking. This property has already been ordered, and so this is now levying assessments against this property owner. So I think my opinion would be that it would be more appropriate for this to be on as a regular item to give this property owner the opportunity to speak their piece to whatever they need to.
Is the property owner, I mean, I thought he was the one that sort of brought it forward.
Yes, the property owner did request this assessment.
Right.
Okay.
So he requested it.
Okay.
Brian?
This is strictly 3737. I know this is strictly 3737. Are there any other properties adjacent that should and/or could go on to public sewer?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I would have to check. But the Franklin County Public Health Department does look over these properties, and if they have a failing system, they are required to connect.
Certainly.
If we extend public sewer, then we usually go and work with the health department and the property owners to connect at that time. This must have been one that was left from many, many years ago.
So the main is in proximity. This is just a tap-in?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question if Brian's done? So did the homeowner request to tie into the public sewer, or was the homeowner
Has to,
asked to?
has to.
They were required to by the health department. So based on Ohio Revised Code, if you have a failing septic system and there is sanitary sewer within some reasonable distance and it is possible to connect, they are required to connect. They have requested an assessment of the fees to help soften,
Sure.
the challenge of making that connection.
Sure, I understand that.
Questions? So we want this on regular agenda, right?
That's my preference is regular.
I'd prefer an emergency and again, start getting the assessment for it.
Oh, that's right.
We won't get the assessment for it for another year if we don't get it on as an emergency. But again, it's a timing that's been brought to us. Again,
So
not sure
what,
if I'm not sure.
22 or 23.
Right.
Yeah, and if it's,
What was the reason this wasn't brought 2 weeks ago?
So we brought this forward earlier this year, and there's a couple ways you can go about an assessment. We brought forward as a process of 2 steps. When it was presented to the county, they needed some updates to the ordinance. They did not mention that to us, and we noticed that nothing was occurring, so we reached back out to them and said, hey, we need these updates. These updates was this final piece, which was actually levying the assessment. So the process that we just went through here is typical of a capital improvement project where, let's say, you install sanitary and you assess the actual construction of that line as well as connection fees. So this did take an additional step, and it was based on a template that was in the council clerk's office. So we're working with the clerk's office to update our procedure manual to make sure that we align the processes.
So
I believe the ask is regular agenda, and it can be determined later whether it is emergency or not.
can we change that at the meeting?
You can always.
So regular agenda.
Did you say, I'm sorry, Grant, did you say waiver and emergency
This has to
is
be-
required for 22, or just emergency, or which?
It would have to be waiver and emergency. They need everything by the 18th of this month. So it'd have to be approved at the next formal meeting so that we could give it to them immediately.
Well, then that would just be waiver. We wouldn't need emergency then. We wouldn't need, if I understand this correctly.
No, you would need both emergency and waiver. Speaking to Ms. Gonchar this morning, she said if council were to elect to pursue and pass this with emergency waiver, that would be on the 18th. and then she could send all of the information to to Franklin County on the 19th, which would be the next morning, and they would have that then in enough time. But if it were not to be emergency or waiver, then it would be too late to issue that or attach that assessment for this year, for 22 taxes, I should say.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, what is that date for 22? What's the cutoff date?
They typically like to have it in September, that we've learned, but they said their drop dead date was the 18th.
Well, if we got them, I think Crystal, from what I understood, the deputy clerk, or the clerk of council to say this morning.
Oh,
when
yes.
When she explained it to them, that the next regular council meeting was the 18th, and if she would get it to them by the 19th, then that would be fine for them.
Yeah, sorry, I had it
No,
Tuesday
that's-
as the 18th in my
Sorry.
mind.
And then just for clarification, what is the position of the homeowner on this?
From my understanding, this does not affect the connection process. This would just affect when it starts being charged on
Understood.
their property taxes.
No, I understand that. What is the position of the property owner with regard to when this occurs, 22 versus 23?
We have not asked the homeowner. I would say the position of the homeowner is they have gone through environmental court to connect. So based on Franklin County Public Health's actions, they need this done quickly. Granted, this does not change that process. As far as when it actually is placed on their taxes and when their first bill comes for this, I haven't asked them. I would assume that they don't want to pay it as long as they can.
Do you know if this was a consent in environmental court or whether the homeowner did not consent and resisted the implementation of this?
I have not read the court proceedings, so I'm not sure. I know it's been around for quite some time, going through the environmental court process. I believe 2 or 3 years ago this started, so that's all I know.
I'm not comfortable with emergency and waiver on this.
I would also note, we brought this forward as a regular council agenda item, and it was the clerk's phone call with Franklin County that then prompted the opportunity, should council choose to pursue emergency waiver. That's an option. But again, we brought it forward as a regular council agenda item, so.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, anybody else have?
I'm fine with
Okay.
Just a clarifying question, Grant. Has the construction/connection already taken place, or will that take place in the next construction season?
It has not taken place. It will take place as soon as these fees are assessed to the property tax. By code, they cannot connect until the fees have been covered. Once they're covered, they can start. Oftentimes, construction does occur throughout the winter months. It actually sometimes helps with the ground being frozen. You don't create muddy conditions. So I would not expect this to have any significant delays on the actual connection.
So
It
just
may
to make
actually
sure-
help.
Just to make sure I understood you correctly, they will not connect, and this environmental challenge will not be remediated until we basically pass until they start collecting the monies. Is that correct?
No, once the ordinance is passed and then the clerk advertises it for a week, send the
I see.
notification to the homeowner and then to the county, that is when it would occur.
We just
Okay.
have to pass the ordinance.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Nancy.
Yes.
Grant, the homeowners are definitely aware of this, correct? They are definitely aware of the cost, correct?
Yes, they've been in
Right.
violation for an extended period of time.
For time value of money, we should actually not only pass this, but pass this with a emergency and a waiver and get it done.
I would agree.
It's also an environmental and public health safety issue as well.
Agreed, but as we just heard, that doesn't have, this assessment being assessed in 22 or 23 doesn't impact the connection. Doesn't affect the remediation.
Right, so not exactly sure why we wouldn't receive revenue for something that has to happen anyway.
Why we wouldn't start collecting a year earlier
Yes.
rather than later. I mean, we're putting the money up front and we just gonna get it paid back, so why not do it why not do it a year earlier?
It should be done in 2022.
So how do we change? Do we change it now, or do we put it
We'll make one motion,
on Monday?
both of them, yeah.
Okay, all right, so we'll just put it on the regular agenda for Monday, correct?
Yes.
All right. So this will be on the regular agenda for first reading. Well, it'd be for first reading, right?
In short, yes. However, if we can determine right here, we're, from a committee standpoint, as far as where it goes, and then the vote and/or any discussion can adjust it.
We can
I'm
move it to.
generally hearing that a regular agenda item with emergency and waiver is the procedurally logical path. Now, it may end up failing emergency, it may end up failing waiver. Well, it wouldn't fail waiver, unless it just fails, I would expect. But it would seem that that would be the logical place to put it, is regular with emergency and
All right,
waiver.
so it'll be on the regular agenda with waiver and emergency. And then we can vote up.
And with that will come the motions associated, discussion, and any adjustments may be debated or amendments may be put on at that time.
Okay. So it'll be on the regular agenda with waiver and emergency, and then we can have discussions at the time. All right.
In fact, it really doesn't have to have with waiver and emergency on the agenda. It simplifies things. The motion can be to pass with waiver and emergency,
Okay. So don't put the waiver and emergency.
either way.
Either way.
All right, we won't put the waiver and emergency on the agenda, just on the regular agenda for first reading then, right?
Put it on as an agenda item for first reading and with waiver. Well, would have to go, it would fit best with an agenda item as first reading with waiver. It can be then motioned as
With emergency.
with the emergency and the
Okay,
and
so the
waiver.
regular agenda with waiver. All right, okay. All right. Thank you. Next, items from the Department of Economic Development. Ordinance 0062-2021.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Microphone closer.
How's that? Better?
Yeah.
Same.
Better.
A little bit.
Much better.
A or B?
Good evening. I had a chance, thankful to be here this evening to talk about this project. As a refresher, we've been working on this a good time before even I got into the city. This company's been an active exploring opportunities both in the region as well as internationally, and we're prepared to bring this forward to this body. Can we go to the next slide, please? A little background on the project. This is the expansion of an existing Gahanna-based business who has currently 200-plus employees in their facility. They are currently exploring an increase of their opportunities, specifically around their manufacturing, distribution, as well as the creation of an R&D center of excellence here in Gahanna. This level of investment would create a de facto North American headquarters facility for their operations here in the city of Gahanna. You're looking at a minimum of 20 new jobs. It's anticipated to be somewhere closer to 40 to 50 over the life of the project, with a net new payroll of estimated about $2.35 million against that 20 job mark. You can extrapolate from there if you go to 20 or 50 jobs, what those numbers end up looking like. This $20 million investment includes a proposed new facility, which you see a artistic rendering there, as well as a proposed what I'm going to call a semi-public private parklet area located across the street from the facility. They anticipate creating a green space retention facility with some interconnecting trailhead facilities to connect to the city's existing trail spaces along that area for employees to go out. They've talked about having pergolas or other quasi-operational things that I think, Councilwoman, we've talked about previously. This is on a private property, but ultimately would be open to the public or accessible to anyone in the marketplace. You see a pro forma based upon the job projection on the project. I did a 5-year timeline on it. The state of Ohio is exploring a 3-year timeline on it, so starting in 2023, what those jobs look like from their state level incentive process. You can see what the existing payroll projections look like, the net new payrolls on the projects, and then the income tax generation on those net news across the 5-year span, with total values generated during the abatement period as identified in the last column. Kevin, go to the next slide, please. This was in your council packet. This was the ROI calculations, as I mentioned in prior discussions. I utilized the George Wondovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs. They gave a template ROI calculator for projects like this. This is the CapEx model. This is the full capture of the anticipated building, furniture, machinery exchange, tech center drive expansion, private park space expansion. If you go to hit the next button, Kevin, this is actually the assessment model. So this shows a number of about $6.5 million, give or take, on the building, and that's comped against the existing other headquarters R&D type facilities. When you factor in, say, a Grody, Donato's, and Innovation Hub type facilities, and how we proportioned out those spaces from a ROI standpoint, I think this is a much closer estimate as to what the overall investment total and return on investment to the city would be. And I think in your packet, let me pull that up real quick in my packet here. You're killing me, Smalls. We're talking somewhere in a neighborhood of about 142% on net new investment towards what the city would contribute to the project, or a total return on investment of about 258% against total investment values. A couple key other notes here. In the request that you have before you, there's a development agreement that outlines a lot of this, especially around the CRA and the contribution of the tax increment financing from the Central Park TIF of $250,000. There's also parlance of relaying some of these properties. So the property in question that they're looking to expand upon is currently city-owned property. That property would be conveyed to the city's CIC, who would then contractually sell it to the developer at the fair market value. That fair market value was determined by an assessment that the city contracted to do earlier this year. I believe it was in April of this year through Robert Weiler and Associates. They deemed the property to be valued at about $830,000. There is no considerations given against a discount on that property. They're paying full value of that assessed value to the CIC in a one-time transaction at the closure of the property sale. One of the things you'll note in the development agreement, I did leave some contingency language with our legal attorneys around who would manage the process for the Tech Center Drive expansion. The reason we did this is we're currently exploring a program called 629, which is a state-sponsored dollar program through Jobs Ohio. There's also a separate pot of money that we're exploring through ODOT. If either one of those funding opportunities basically allays the city from committing the $250,000, or we have no dollar commitment into it, if we use it as a public dollar project versus a private developer reimbursement type project, I want to make sure the city had the capacity to implement that project accordingly. I don't anticipate that happening, but I wanted to allow for the flexibility as part of that deal structure. So that's why that language is in the development agreement. As always, I'll always put a reminder on these with a property tax abatement. Property tax abatements are usually a very, very dirty word in economic development. Always like to remind individuals that property tax abatements are only on the improved values on the property that's being abated. So it doesn't have any negative or positive impacts to the surrounding properties. We're only abating the improved value on that property for that time period. You'll note also in the ROI it's at the bottom quarter of the ROI, you'll note the estimated compensation to the schools of $909,000. That was calculated assuming under our current school compensation agreement, in which we have a income tax share generation from the new taxes generated on the project, as well as a proration of the anticipated property taxes lost by the school. So they will be made whole as part of this project, and that calculation was also included as part of the ROI formula. Next slide, Kevin. And last but certainly not least, timing. We heard a lot of, actually, Grant kind of teed me up really well on this, so I look forward to having a hearty discussion on emergency and waiver. But as always with these types of projects, timing is of the essence. When we discussed this informally a few weeks ago, I had mentioned then we weren't quite sure when the state of Ohio was going to move on any incentives. What's driving the conversation tonight is twofold. The first being this was the earliest I could get in front of you with the attorneys having drafted the documents that you have in the packets. The secondly being is Jobs Ohio and the state of Ohio are looking to make a decision with this company in the next 7 to 10 days. And so our goal would be to have this kind of aligned to their process from a timing standpoint, so we can all be in lockstep as final decisions are being made, any announcements are being had, and any activities are underway. So that's what the timing is. A lot of this is. If this body were to pass this on an emergency and waiver, we would look through executing the CRA agreement almost simultaneously after the body acts. Through my office, the mayor would be authorized to do her activities with the development agreement, and then working through the CIC. We would still be about 3 weeks after being able to close on any properties, both coming from the city to the CIC and then from the CIC to the developer. So there's still some moving parts that happen at the end of this, just so we're all clear on this. So that's why it's really imperative to move as nimbly as we can to finalize this project. To that, I change it to you and ask for any questions you might have as it relates to the project.
Nancy?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have forgotten it. Can you go back to the revenue side?
Yeah. Which, I'm assuming you want the assessed value with the 6?
Not so much the real estate, but the income tax?
Yeah.
Which line is it?
In the middle in the white box.
The net new payroll? Is that what you're
Or do
talking
you want to go back one more slide? Kevin, can we go back to one more? That was the transition. You're talking about that slide. Fair?
Yes, I believe. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
You'll know from the payroll numbers, Councilman, that we're anticipating the commitment of being about $117,500 per net on the net new jobs. So these are substantial job opportunities.
One other question. The value in the lower right, 1.6, isn't the additions of 23 through 27? So what is that number?
That would be the last 10 years at a full build.
So the pro forma is 22 through 27, but that number is through 32?
That would be through the end of the abatement period. So yes, that would be through the end of 32.
Any other questions? Michael?
Yeah, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Strum. Global headquarters, R&D, so forth and so on, all sound very nice. Can you comment just a little bit about, I know your department, or I believe your department has some various target industries.
Yes.
Can you comment how this proposed project fits into some of that?
Absolutely. So from our Go Forward Gahanna, as well as the economic development strategy that was passed by the city council a number of years ago, predating my time with the city, manufacturing, R&D, office are all three principal industries that we talk about in identifying those categorizations of target industries. In particular, this opportunity being that it's a retention project, so this is an existing business who's already invested tens of millions of dollars into our city, and they're looking to invest tens of millions of dollars more. Certainly rises to the top of that list from a target structure. If I had to pull a project and a company out of thin air and say, yep, I want to do this as my first major project in the city of Gahanna, this would have been it, quite frankly. When you talk about retention of 200 jobs and a substantial payroll to the city existing, and then you factor in additional 20 to 40, possibly even 50 new jobs in the R&D space, in the automotive, or excuse me, not automotive, in aerospace, R&D, this is a home run, in my opinion, for the city of Gahanna.
Thank you.
Steven?
Yeah, thank you. Could you, I haven't gone through the entire development agreement, but one of the items that you had on the slides was the clawback. And can you elaborate for the public and for me?
Sure.
What that actually entails and what type of milestones will you be looking at?
Sure. So really, from a real estate transactional standpoint, Councilman, we are looking at if the project does not go forward by the defined period of time, so my estimation would be about 2 weeks after the post-closure from the city council. If we don't close on it, the CIC can claw it back, or if there's a delay in the construction process, if the transaction were to occur and then the delays in construction go out beyond a reasonable period of time, the CIC has the ability to buy that property back. General clawbacks to the project, which I think you're looking for, though, this project would fall under the TIRC, the Tax Incentive Review Commission by the city of Gahanna, in which there's members appointed by this body, the mayor's office. I sit on the TIRC, and we annually review these projects with the city audit or the county auditor's office. Clawbacks, we can reduce this project, we can cancel the project if any job commitments, payroll commitments, capital investment commitments are not met in a timely and equitable fashion. To the best of my knowledge, we just had our TIRC maybe 60 days ago with the county auditor's office. All of our abatements were in compliance at the time. I'm not aware of any history of non-compliant abatements within the city of Gahanna. I can't tell you professionally, I've revoked 3 in my time as in various roles for the lack of compliance of jobs, non-commitment of jobs, loss of payroll, closure of business, things of that nature. So those parameters still apply to the project.
Good. Thank you. I think it's really important to emphasize that as well when we're considering these types of projects.
Absolutely.
And also, as a note to the clerk, can we make sure that these slides are also part of this record as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Questions? I had one, and this is probably going to seem real picky, but in the developers agreement, it talks about completing the tech center drive, expanding it.
Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't list, would there be a leisure trail on that?
There would be, I believe, a trail
Multi-use
component. Yes, ma'am. It'd be designed to the city specification. So whatever's in the specification for the public service road there would be expanded.
Right, and note, it does not go all the way through.
Correct.
But it lists like signs, street tree plantings, street lights, but it doesn't say multi-use trail. So that's why it lists other things, but
Sure.
I just want to make sure that's,
It's whatever's in the public spec, Council.
that
So
in the
if the
public-
CIC estimate is off, quite frankly, that's a break on them. We provided them with the city spec for it to be designed and estimated at. I can certainly follow up with the developer tomorrow.
Yes, bike paths and sidewalks are required.
okay, all right. Since it didn't say specifically, I was just, okay. Any other questions? So, okay, let me go back. So you're asking for waiver, are you just addressing all of them at once here? Are we going one by one?
I think you need to address them all together, because if you break it out one by one, it really kind of negates the ability to execute the opportunity as
So
a
we have,
package.
We have 4 then, that you need waiver and emergency on, all of them?
Yes, ma'am.
There's 3, I
Pardon?
think.
There's 3. There's the development agreement, the CRA agreement, and the land transaction agreement.
Okay, it's page, okay, I see, all right, just the 3. So 62, 61, 62, and 63. Everybody okay with waiver and emergency? Okay. Do you want it on regular agenda? You want them on regular agenda? Okay. So we will have these on regular agenda. 61, 62, and 63.
In the interim, my door is always open, so as we're going through any process here in the next week or so, if you have questions about what you've seen this evening or anything that may come up in the interim, please feel free to call me. More than happy to sit down, share a screen, walk through any numbers. I think we're being broadcast as well, so if any of the general public has an interest or question about it, more than happy to help answer their questions and alleviate any concerns they may have. As best I can.
All right. Any other questions?
This is 61, 62, and 63.
Right.
62, 61, 63.
Okay, we're, next item.
Woo! This is a good one. So before you as well is a moratorium request related to medical marijuana. Brought up by the state of Ohio on September 15th, the expansion of dispensaries within the state was recently moved by the Department of Commerce from 57 dispensaries statewide to 130. They also allow for expansions of grow, cultivation, and processing facilities within the state of Ohio as well to meet the demand of the medical marijuana cannabis industry here in the state. In talking with the mayor and the chief of police, I thought it'd be a good idea as we kind of adjust and understand what the socioeconomic impacts have been in the current jurisdictions of where these are located before we understand where they're going. What really drove this action is since the announcement about a month ago, my office has fielded, I think, 6 different calls looking to locate dispensaries in the city of Gahanna, and I've actually asked openly, like, what's the city's position on this? Because, I mean, either we treat it like a pharmacy or we treat it like any other type of local commercial space. I didn't really have any whole lot of guidance except from the city attorney's office, who said we had a moratorium on it previously, and he'd like to start another moratorium. to understand the impacts of these operations. So that's what's bringing before you. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
You have questions?
I have a whole slate of questions. I can go by them one by one. I assume you may not have answers to all of them tonight.
That's a great presumption, Councilwoman.
But I at least want to get it out there, and I will follow up in writing too.
Sure.
So, do you have any? Is there anything else as part of the presentation, or is that kind of the scope of, like?
Mayor.
No, I would simply add, as Director Strom stated, since the state law, or since the state made its announcement, we have seen an increasing influx of inquiries that have been coming into the city, and we don't know what the position of the city was. We know that there was a moratorium previously, that was on for 6 months. It expired in 2018. I do remember what this council was working on, at least most of this council was working on in 2018. I believe there was an income tax issue, and the city was under some financial straits at the time. So we could not find really any record of there being public discussion on this subject around that period of time. So the whole reason for asking this is simply to ask for some time to have that opportunity to have some research, evaluation done, and dialogue with this body, as well as with the community input, again, driven by the number of inquiries that we have been receiving, particularly over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah. To that point, Mayor, I wanted to highlight, I mean, prior to the announcement by the state of Ohio on September 15th, there was really no indication of any level of expansion, both to the dispensary or to the cultivation and processing side. There were actually 2 different legal cases pending before the state Supreme Court related to expansion of growing facilities that have been denied by the Department of Commerce only because there wasn't any guidance tied to those expansions and what the tipping point would be in those spaces. And then it literally was, well, yeah, you can expand, and you know what? Let's just do all the dispensaries. Let's just do the whole thing at once. And we haven't really seen a whole lot of guidance, at least I haven't. I can still continue to dig into that from the Department of Commerce in particular, as it relates to the socioeconomic impacts, where these are going to be located. There'll be similar stipulations to the prior ones based upon proximity to neighborhoods, schools, things that they had to be within a certain jurisdictional boundary, as well as having various proximities away from other types of uses. I haven't really seen what that guidance had looked like as of yet. But we are getting, like I said, it's not substantial. I wouldn't say that I'm getting inundated by left and right folks all the time, but 6 on an inquiry of a type of business within a span of 3 weeks is a significant uptick compared to other industries and other calls that we've yielded in a similar time frame.
Could we, just a question, could we issue the moratorium on, it's like 4 uses here, there's 4 different things.
Mhm.
Could we do 2 of them and not?
That's a great question.
I
from the
mean,
city
could we
attorney's
do,
office.
could we do,
Don't mean to kick you there, Matt.
I mean, if you had, I mean, I don't know, if like, I mean, maybe we wouldn't have a problem with the cultivation and processing, but we don't want to, we're not sure about the distribution and sale. So could we split it? I mean, that's just a question I had.
I can tell you from my past experiences, so in my pre-Gahanna days, I know at least one of my former jurisdiction partners who did just that. They encouraged the cultivation and processing, manufacturing of equipment thereof to support the industry. They encouraged all of those, but then they also restricted dispensaries within their city boundaries, or was village, now city boundaries. So they were able to do that. Now, whether or not it's been ever challenged in court or if that was proper, I can't speak to. I just know that that was one of the ways they did it.
So if I could, like, why 1 year? Why is 1 year a magic number? And what are the specific, is there an action step? Like, this month we're going to do a town hall. This month we're going to have a discussion at committee of the whole. Is that developed yet? And why 1 year? That's one of my questions.
So 1 year came at the recommendation of the city attorney. Largely, he felt that, he's not here, but I'll tell you what he said to me. That 3 months is too short because at this point, 3 months is till the end of the year, and we're going to be heavily focused on the budget. So any kind of meaningful discussion outside of that is probably going to be slim to none. If you're looking at a 6-month period, we know we have at least 1 new council member who will be onboarded at the first of the year, and the city attorney felt that 6 months is basically no different than 3 months. So we get 3 months, we're focused on budget, and then another 3 months after that until you have a new council member that becomes onboarded and kind of gets their legs under them to try to have a fruitful discussion and a really meaningful dialogue in that period of time would also be kind of shortcutting ourselves. So he recommended a 1 year period, keeping in mind that council could rescind that or shorten that at any point in the process. In terms of your second question about what would be the project list, so to speak. Haven't gotten there yet, because this came up very quickly. Again, with the number of inquiries that we've had, it was, okay, we need to just bring this issue up with you now, because we could have an application tomorrow, and if it's zoned correctly, it's going in, and we don't have a say in that whatsoever. So if council were to issue that, then that would be the next step in the process of developing what that would look like.
So there's 53 grow sites in Ohio, is that what you said?
53 dispensary sites.
53 dispensary sites.
Over 88 counties.
And 10, is it still 10 grow sites, or where are we at now?
There's substantially more grow sites because I think the population that they anticipated utilizing medical cannabis was about 125,000 carded Ohioans. I think it's over 275,000. So it's almost over double what they'd additionally anticipated. I know in Licking County, there's 3 grow sites. So I know there's more than 10,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
So I guess my concern, I think, is that if we give this a full year, that the new allocation that's out there will just naturally miss Gahanna, and there will be no opportunity for that revenue. So I think I would like to know kind of what is the time, what was the timeline for, it seems to me that anytime there's been any opening of this,
Sure.
that these spaces have been absolutely.
If I may, the deadline, there's a window, a 2-week window, November 4th and November 18th. They have to have their applications in. As I understand the process, and again, I've just heard this, because full disclosure, I'm working currently on 1 and potentially 5 more are right behind it, throughout the state. There's a 2-week period, November 4th and November 18th, where you submit your application. You need to basically show that you're shovel-ready, that you've got proper zoning, that you've got something done. If you've got something done, if you're a viable project, it goes in one pile. If you're just somebody that thinks this would be really cool to have a dispensary, you go in the other pile. And from whoever's qualified, the number of licenses that are available will be drawn randomly. It's a lottery for those that are prepared. If there's 50 licenses and 100 applications, there's 50 upset people.
Yeah.
If there's 50 qualified folks and 100 licenses, then they go to the other folks that just thought this would be really cool. And so if we don't have an application in the next week or two and zoning underway, the reality is these people are not going to be qualified for and put in the premium lottery. The city of Columbus, rather than go through the zoning process, has a council variance. They will allow the zoning to be varied at a council level at one meeting, so that it doesn't have to go through planning and zoning and all those kind of things in the whole process, and it cuts about 3 months out of the process. That's how they're addressing that. They're moving so fast that they're cutting 3 months out of their own zoning process.
Just so I understand, just as a follow-up, where I was going with the question was basically like, as soon as the lottery is open, we assume that those permits will be gone. Like, the new permits will be taken.
So November 4th and November 18th is when those applications are due.
Mm-hmm.
And then within a month or 2 of that, so by the end of the year, whatever new licenses are available will be distributed to whoever applies in that 2-week period. So if you don't have your application in and you're not already in the process between November 14th and November 18th, you're at a disadvantage right now.
And I think historically, there have been more applicants than there have been slots, right? And
Yes.
we would anticipate that to be the case going forward?
The frantic pace at which I'm working on these projects would indicate that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councilman, if I may, is that about the cultivation and growth facilities, or are those dispensaries as
I'm
well?
looking at the dispensaries right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure that was bundled and make sure it was understood.
Yep.
It's for all elements
Yeah.
of the process.
But yeah, I believe the window is similar for all facilities, but
I believe it is.
I'm just looking at dispensaries right now.
Okay, Brian?
Just one question. What's been the review or the assessment of what had been done previously? The map that was created, any of that information?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
What has been reviewed and/or the assessment of any of the information that was done previously, the map that was kind of laid out, any of that information?
We have not been able to locate any information from whatever assessment was done previously.
Okay.
there was one done.
Yeah.
But Brian has it. It shows where the zoning and it has all the overlays and stuff, so I didn't know,
My understanding also is the current rules apply as far as location from schools and
Yeah,
those
it's the
type.
same- I'm assuming it was the
Those-
same restrictions.
Yeah, so it's those same restrictions and everything else, so that map would be viable, so.
I can
believe
check
there
with Michael Blackford and see what his office might have. I just, again, it's going through my office operationally.
And forgive me, I misinterpreted your question. I was understanding you to ask about discussion and research that had happened after the moratorium was in place. That's what I interpreted.
And anything.
Karen.
Yeah, we have a constituent in our beautiful city of Gahanna that works in this as an attorney, and I would suggest maybe we should, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Who? If we could get a hold of him to get a little more value in terms of what we should be doing in terms of, again, should we go ahead and do the moratorium, or should we say, hey, let's have a, party thing. So, and he's a really good constituent, Lloyd Pierre Louis, and I think I gave that information to you, did I not, Mayor?
You did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perhaps if we would get in touch with him, he might be able, give us a little more information. All I know is Johnstown is, going crazy with all the things that are happening there.
My office was involved with much of that, my former office.
Yeah. So, anyway, I would just suggest that we get some information from someone who is working in the field.
Okay, back to the ordinance. What's the pleasure? First reading?
I guess I think I have a lot of questions still about this, and I think Ms. Angelou has brought some questions up, and Mr. Lyric has brought some questions up. I would like to see this back in committee.
So we have first reading, and then we can bring it back to committee.
We could, or we could just keep it in committee.
Well, you have additional questions that you've already written out?
I do,
would go through
yeah.
them.
I guess I'm interested to know, and I think this relates.
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to ask you if you had.
Okay, thank you. I think this relates to what Mr. Lyric was bringing up, because I'm not familiar with the map that has been previously generated either, and there's really not much that's been attached to this item. So what was done, I guess, from 2018 or even prior to present, and sort of what information do we have as a city have related to this topic? What are the measurable questions that we intend to research, and how are we going to evaluate the potential impact to Gahanna? I would assume that there would be some potential revenue sort of analysis going on, but what are the other questions that we're even asking?
So to that point, Councilman, if I may, my goal was to, Chief and I have had a couple of conversations as part of senior staff, but I'm also connected to some other fellow law enforcement, other folks, to find out what, if any, detrimental impacts to public safety, costs, et cetera, have occurred with other dispensary-type facilities in other cities of moderate to mid-size. I know, being where I was previously, the city of Newark, I'm close with their public safety director and mayor. I was going to reach out to them probably this week to find out about their 2 dispensaries that they have in the city, as well as what revenues they've kind of generated from those facilities, taxation-wise, permitting-wise, as well as any public safety drains that they may have incurred from that. I think the city of Newark is 50,000 people plus, so they're a little larger than the city of Gahanna, but certainly of a comparable scale and size, and something that we could potentially see as an impact operationally with 1 or 2 dispensaries in their jurisdictional boundaries.
And I guess an estimate on how long would that analysis take?
Well, it just depends on how quickly they can respond to the inquiry, quite frankly.
Right.
I mean, if I call, Mayor Hall and his team tomorrow, when could I anticipate a response back? Quite frankly, I'm going to be out that way anyway tomorrow afternoon, so I was going to just pop in on them and scare them for S&Gs anyway.
Along with that, if we've had 6, did you say 6 calls in? Were they all for dispensary?
He had 6. I had another 4 myself.
Yeah.
So there's 10 that have come in?
And they were all dispensaries. for
All
me. Like,
dispensary.
where we permit this, what would it look like?
Next
They
to the
were-
guy, the
I refer them
Vape
to
shop. We
zoning,
can put it right
find out
next to
about
the vape
planning
shop.
Commission hearings and how we work through it.
And none of that surprises me. Actually, at the summit that the mayor hosted, I think when introducing you, Mr. Strum, there were people there that had connections to cultivation industry, and were interested in our proximity to the airport, and that was several months ago. So certainly no surprise that there's an interest in that. Yeah, I guess for me, it's like, so what are these plans? What is going to happen? Why does it take a year? Do we, what is this window that Mr. Leesburg has referenced? And does that apply not just to dispensaries, but also to cultivation sites? And certainly, the rapid rate at which these permits are going to be distributed. So that's the outstanding questions that I have.
I think the question was answered about why a year. It's only because we can always shorten it if we get, it's just a time. It could have been, it's just a set time, but we can change it or lessen it at any time if we figure out what we want to do. It doesn't have to be a year. We can rescind the moratorium at any time.
Yeah.
But it just gives us plenty of time
And
without
what-
having to come back in 6 months and do another moratorium.
Right. But considering like what we've asked before, I think with measurables or information that's being, the moratorium is being asked so we can gather this information. So if we have an idea of what the information is that's going to be gathered and the timeline that it's going to take, we might be able to craft better legislation from the outset.
But I think the purpose of it is to put off those, so that because we have so many budget things coming up, they don't have the time to develop that right now. So we'll do the moratorium, and then after the first of the year, we can start. That was what I understood it to be, was that just to give more time. And we can always rescind it if it's done, yes.
What I want to understand is the sequence of events of this as an activity. And I'm not talking about the moratorium. I'm talking about this process as developed by ORC. Mr. Leesburg has just identified there's a November 4th date, there's a 2-week window, et cetera, but is there procedurally, with regard to this, what is beginning to end with this with regard to the state? Is that known today?
Not by me personally, no, sir.
Mr. Leesburg, are you the expert in the room?
Yes, I'm the expert. Again, all I've heard is that window for applications and licenses would be issued by the end of the year.
So that's really the only date sequence that we know.
Right. But again, in order to be looked upon favorably for one of those, again, as a lottery, you would need to be in the zoning process. So if there's somebody not currently in the zoning process, there's an application filed, or you've got a properly zoned building, there's folks that are building brand-new buildings, there's folks that they're looking at old Arby's and having a drive-through, because drive-throughs are allowed under this new one, as I understand it, or will be. So, I mean, they're looking at retrofitting old restaurants and those kind of things. So one of the companies I'm working with is all over the state. They're looking for, if we've got an existing building and we just need to retrofit it, what do we need to do? Or if we're a blank slate and we're building a new building. But again, all of those people are scrambling right now to get a site plan, an application into a zoning, those types of things. If they don't need rezoned, and they said, again, we've got a map that says where we can do this, and they've bought the building, then I guess they're a step ahead of everybody else because they don't need the zoning for it.
And candidly, to Councilman's point, I mean, that's kind of where they were with me. And they've reached out to my office and inquired. And I've said, I'd recommend them to Michael Blackford's office to evaluate what might be available in zoning. Again, if Michael had a copy of that map, they very well, to the best of our knowledge, may already be down that pipeline.
Yeah.
Moving towards a permit or application.
And again, if they've already acquired a properly zoned,
Then there's nothing.
then there's nothing we can do about it anyway. A moratorium wouldn't stop that anyway.
Correct.
So,
I have visualizations of an Arby's being used for this, but now that's stuck in my head.
I have a question.
that's
get
one of
curly
the sites
fries.
I'm looking at is an Arby's.
Okay, Karen.
This is medical marijuana, but I'd like to ask the chief is in case, when this is, if this would be is this something that can, although we hope it wouldn't be, create a safety issue? I'm sorry for putting that in. I mean,
Let me
I've
see how I
had,
can dance around this question.
I was hoping you could.
Here's a short answer, yes.
All right.
I mean, let's face it, it's a cash-only business that presents a risk in and of itself. You know, some of the effects of medical marijuana in other states, and this is just preliminary, we're seeing an increase in driving under the influence related to marijuana use. You know, what that does, we're already seeing an uptick in impaired driving over previous years. There was a lull for a couple of years. That's starting to increase. I think it will take some time for us to have that data out there. The biggest thing that concerns me is it being a cash-only business. And when we're talking cash, we're talking a lot of cash on hand. The nearest dispensary from the city of Gahanna is 1.96 miles away from our border. It's right on a mass transit line. It's easily accessible, right down West Johnstown Road. I don't really think that we're somehow depriving our residents while we get a handle on this. I think there are a lot of things that are related to the newness of this and what effects it does have. Make no mistake, it does have an effect on safety. You know, I attended a seminar that was put on by some law enforcement officers in Colorado. They've had medical marijuana, and I believe now they have essentially a recreational use statute in place. And the focus was on impaired driving and the number of arrests that have gone up specifically related to marijuana use. Again, it's 1.96 miles away. It's on a transit line. You know, I do think, and I've had discussions with Nate related to some of the other businesses. There's chemical testing, quality control, some other things that, given the right site in Gahanna and given the things that certainly Mr. Leesburg would know about, you know, preparing the site and that sort of thing, that, yes, I think there's some discussions and that those could be valid discussions. I have concerns over dispensaries. I always will until, you know, we have more data. But again, if it were something that wasn't readily at hand and immediately available in a dispensary just outside our jurisdiction, then I think there could be more discussion on, you know, the moratorium in terms of, you know, shortening that time frame. Obviously, we can come back with more information. Is there value in considering maybe a tiered approach and looking at some of the other things, especially related to testing in the laboratory environment and some of those things that Gahanna has some space for? I think that's a valuable discussion as well. But the short answer, Karen, is yes.
If I may dovetail on that, I mean, when you look at some of the jobs that are tied to this industry, a lot of those major investments have already occurred, and those facilities that have made that investment 3-5 years ago, they're just expanding those operations in those facilities and in those communities. They're not really looking, in my experience, to go beyond it. What we're really talking about here is potentially some new grow facilities, so on the cultivation side, as well as those emerging areas that the chief referenced in the testing, which would be I think would be very interesting as an opportunity for us. But we're not really talking about like the manufacturing equipment side of this business necessarily. And a lot of the activity that have been coming to my office, at least, has been in that dispensary space, so that distribution, retail-facing component of it.
Chief, as I recall, and again, I don't know if it was from the Citizens Academy or it was the last time we discussed the moratorium, there's a difference between alcohol consumption and impaired driving versus the, as far as illegal, because it lingers in your system longer. Trying to prove someone was impaired, those kind of things. If you pull somebody over, those types of things. Can you speak to that?
That's correct. And I'll, you know, I don't have the information at hand, and I'm just going to recall the conversations that we had with the law enforcement officers in Colorado. But essentially, the way they, when they debriefed or collected data from those that were arrested that were under the influence of marijuana, in most every case, they categorize themselves as an occasional user with a medical marijuana card. This was prior to the recreational use statute passing. And because that remains in the system, they were almost always operating with a level of impairment over the per se limit.
And that's because the level at which you test it, it shows, it's kind of it's binary. It's either you have it or you don't.
Yes.
Whether the effects are still there or not, but again, you're going to leave a lot of folks.
And it remains in the system much longer than alcohol, and there are a number of considerations. But again, I think we're still fairly new in analyzing what that overall impact is on impaired driving. There is some to a degree. That being said, I think more information is needed.
Stephen?
Thank you. So the one at Johnstown and Cassidy, I drive by nearly every day. There are a couple others in Columbus that I drive by because of the nature of my work in the service areas. I will tell you that these are very crowded facilities, and they do increase the safety risk at those locations from a driving point of view. So, with that being said,
if we had 50 more of them, it would be all right.
Oh, for the love. So, to be honest with you, back to your question, I definitely strongly support a one-year moratorium on this. I would like to actually see it stay on our agenda, come back to committee. I guess we have some outstanding questions, but then I'd like to actually get this done. There are a lot of questions that we need answered. And is there a way you can do a search in our Legistar system and find the map that Councilman Lyric is actually talking about? There are areas in Ward 1 that really make me nervous, and so I need to understand what this is. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Did you mention a card? To get any kind of medical marijuana, do you have to have information from the doctor, or that you have the card that you are using that? Did I hear you say a card? I thought I did.
I'll answer it.
Oh,
Hey! No, so you do. So to be prescribed medical cannabis in the state of Ohio, it's exactly what it just says. You have to be prescribed it. There are a number of homeopathic or other doctors who are eligible for prescribing that type of remedy. And then you take that prescription to the dispensary for your medication, and they treat it just as such.
They won't sell it to you if you don't have that.
Correct.
I would make a joke here, but given the firmness of the topic.
Please do.
Nope. Nope. I'm still in my 60-day evaluation period.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
Oh, wait a minute.
You do. You can't just walk up to the window and say, hey, I'll have a bag of curly fries and a side of pot. You have to have a full-blown prescription from a noted and licensed doctor in the state of Ohio. Going back to the Arby's conversation from earlier.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
We're getting close.
Okay.
We're getting closer.
We will put this on for first reading, and it will come back in 2 weeks. How's that?
Does that give us time to stop?
I mean, at the end, worst case scenario, it motivates myself and other members of the staff to go grab some of these data points that are being requested this evening and bring it back before we make any formal other determinations. More than happy to do that.
Right. Okay, is that? All right.
Am I off the hot seat?
Grant, pay the electric bill.
Okay.
Next, from the Department of Information Technology.
Didn't we have that already?
Vonage, it's this Vonage Business Service.
Oh, it's, okay. That was what we had at the beginning.
No, sir. Good evening again. It's rare that I get to talk in front of you guys twice, but here I am again. So in August of this year, our existing phone service provider's contract expired. So during our standard review of the contract, we had sent out a request for quotation for the service. This was a standard procedure that we followed, which included things like background and objective of the overall project, functional areas of response that we needed from each of the vendors, communication protocols, submission requirements, the evaluation process and criteria. I'll just note that for this particular RFQ, there were over 20 functional areas that we solicited detail on. These things included anything from your basic dial tone and voicemail type services all the way down to your more complex line recording and call queuing and those types of functions that we've become accustomed to from a phone system standpoint. So as we work through the process, we established evaluation criteria, the evaluation criteria or weighted criteria for the functional requirements, technical alignment, the project approach for implementation, how would a phone provider implement their services into the city, the vendor's experience, and then as always, there's always a cost or a value proposition added to the criteria of a contract like this, or an RFQ process like this. So we received 4 submissions, one from our existing provider, 3 other external or third-party vendors. A 5th vendor actually rescinded their submission. Review committee was established. The review committee was made up of 3 personnel from the IT department, myself, our system admin, and our desktop support specialist, and then 2 other individuals, one from utility billing and one from public service and engineering, specifically streets and utilities. Independent review and scoring was done of the written material that was submitted. After that was done, the group met. We had a discussion around our scoring and our evaluation process. From that meeting, a short list of 2 vendors was established. As you see on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the screen there, those are the two vendors that were selected to be shortlisted. One of which was Vonage, which is the second 451 points at $58,000. The shortlisted vendors, those 2 vendors there, they came in and they gave brief demonstrations of their product. Their technical capabilities were reviewed. And then we'll just point out that in 2021, our current provider is about $80,000, just shy of $80,000. With a new provider, we would see a cost savings over 3 years of about $123,000 on our solution. That's about $42,000 a year. Over the course of the life of the contract is $123,000 over the 3 years of the contract. Some of the things that we discuss. So we're recommending that we move forward with Vonage as our telecommunications provider, our UCAS provider, Unified Communications as a Service provider, sorry. They obviously offer a full range of the traditional telecommunications services that we would expect, dial tone, voicemail, fax services, anything traditional that you might have or come to expect in today's day and age. Obviously, they are a multinational company. They are on a redundant nationwide network with 8 data centers that service their platform. It opens up and is a scalable and flexible solution that opens up different integrations to different core products that we might have, like Office 365, Microsoft Teams. I know that Nate is talking about implementing CRM. These packages now integrate with CRM, so communication is automatically logged. What did we talk about? How long we were on the phone? Those types of things can come into this, or these integrations can happen between the phone provider and other core systems. And then the other thing that I'll note there on the slide is it also opens us up to mobile application-based technology, so specifically soft phones, and then texting capabilities from any phone number right from our laptop and desktop inside of city-issued desktop or laptop. The other part and piece, so while I already indicated that we see about a $42,000 annual cost savings on the the phone provider's contract, it also opens us up to other potential savings when we start talking about the cell phone bill and whether or not an employee, like I carry around 2 cell phones, one is a city-issued cell phone and one is my personal cell phone. I can now install this soft phone app on my personal cell phone and then have access as if I was sitting directly at my desk to dial out from, which then could further reduce obviously our cellular communications phone bill, which is also a considerable bill, and that is also under review at this particular point in time. So with that, I respectfully request legislation for the mayor, authorizing the mayor to enter into a 3-year agreement with Vonage to be our unified communication service vendor. And with that, I can take any questions.
Any questions? Okay, Brian?
Did the current provider submit a bid, or, yes? Okay.
Yes.
Brian?
A couple of items. From the evaluation review process, was there a follow-up back with the submitters with regard to any updates to their quotes?
No, there was not. Only the shortlisted vendors were contacted.
Were contacted for what purpose?
For demonstration purposes.
For demonstration, not
Yeah.
for any updates to the submissions that they had made?
No, sir. That would, after selection, the general process would be then you go into negotiations with the selected vendor, the preferred vendor at that particular point in time. And then you can negotiate things like cost per line and those types of things, but you generally only do that with one vendor and not 2, and you would never generally do that with somebody who was not shortlisted. Unless for some reason you had reason to go back and open that back up for bid, or I'm sorry, back up for review.
And how were the requests submitted, or not request, how were the requests for submission distributed? Was there a public call? Was there?
The select vendors were reached out to. So the big Microsoft Teams integrators, so 8x8, Call Tower, those were the 2 direct integrators with Microsoft Teams. Our existing vendor, obviously, and then Vonage actually months ago had reached out to me and wanted to have a conversation about when the contract expired, whether or not what the process would be moving forward.
Okay. A couple of comments. One in particular is the current vendor is a local enterprise, just as a public notice or just for awareness. Would ask, my particular background is specific to telecommunications for well over 20 years. Would ask to see the quotes that were submitted as well as the evaluation criteria information that's available. If that could be provided to me, I'd appreciate that.
Process-wise, that's okay? Okay.
That's all I have for this evening. This is regular agenda,
Yeah.
regular process.
Any more questions? Okay, so this will be on for first reading. Do you want it to come back, Brian?
Yes.
Okay, so first reading, and then we'll bring it back to committee in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think this ends Committee of the Whole. Thank you.
I want to say that Grant will be at the Summit on Sustainability as a panel person, and we're going to be proud of him and screaming Gahanna.